My name is Edmund. I am 74 years old. I have been sitting here for about 20 minutes now, trying to figure out how to start this. I don't really know why I'm recording this. Maybe it's because someone close to me passed away last month, and it made me realize how much I have been carrying around without ever putting it into words. There is a name I haven't said out loud in 30 years. I'm not going to rush into it. I just want you to know that, before I say it, there is a whole life attached to it, a whole life that I let go of quietly, without realizing what I was letting go. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. I was not a particularly interesting person when I was young. I was quiet. I kept to myself. I did what was expected of me, and I didn't ask too many questions. I think that's important for you to understand, because the person I'm about to talk about, she was everything I was not. Her name was Margaret. There, I said it. Margaret. I haven't said that name since I was 44 years old, and even now, saying it feels like opening a door I closed a long time ago and forgot I had shut. We knew each other from the time we were very young. She lived 3 houses down from me on a street called Elm. I know how that sounds, Elm Street, like something out of a movie. But it was just a regular street with regular houses and regular people living ordinary lives. Margaret was not ordinary, though. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Not in a dramatic way, not the way people describe it in movies. It was quieter than that. She just paid attention. She actually listened when you talked. And in a town like ours, that was rare. I remember the first time I really noticed her, not as a neighbor, not as someone I passed on the way to school, as a person I wanted to be near. I was about 16. She was the same age. We were sitting on the back steps of her mother's house. It was summer, the kind of summer where the air feels heavy and you don't have anywhere to be and time moves slow. She asked me something. I can't even remember what the question was now. Something small, something that didn't matter, but I remember the way she asked it, like she genuinely wanted to know the answer, like my answer mattered to her. No one had ever made me feel like that before. I didn't say anything meaningful back. I probably said something small, something forgettable. That was my way back then. I didn't know how to be honest with people. I didn't even know I was being dishonest. I just thought that was how conversations worked. You say something safe, you keep things moving. You don't let anyone see too much. Margaret didn't work that way. Over the next few years, we spent a lot of time together. Not in any special way. We weren't together, not like that. Not yet. We just ended up in the same places. She'd be at the corner store and I'd walk in. She'd be sitting on her porch and I'd be walking by. It didn't feel like coincidence at the time. It just felt normal. But looking back now, I think those were the most important moments of my life. And I didn't know it. I didn't know any of it. When we were 19, I got a job at the factory on the edge of town. My father had worked there before me, his father before him. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough, and it kept me busy. And being busy was something I had always preferred. If I was busy, I didn't have to think too much. I didn't have to sit with anything uncomfortable. Margaret had started working at the school. She was going to become a teacher. She told me about it one evening when we were sitting in my car in the parking lot behind the general store. It was October. The air was cold, but we had the windows cracked, and we were just talking. She said she wanted to teach because she believed children needed someone who would actually listen to them. I remember nodding. I remember thinking she was right, but I didn't say anything real back to her. I just nodded and changed the subject. That was the pattern between us. She would open something up, something honest, something real, and I would quietly close it, not on purpose. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I just didn't know how to stay in those moments. They made me uncomfortable. They made me feel exposed in a way I wasn't prepared for. There was an evening in the winter of that same year. We were at a gathering at someone's house. I don't remember whose. It was loud and crowded, and I didn't want to be there. I was standing near the back of the kitchen, holding a glass I wasn't drinking from, when Margaret walked over to me. She looked at me for a moment, just looked at me, and then she said something very quietly. She said, "Edmund, do you ever feel like you're disappearing?" I didn't understand what she meant, or maybe I did, and I just wasn't ready to hear it. I told her I was fine. I told her I was just tired from work. She nodded. She didn't push it. She never pushed. That's one of the things I've carried with me for 30 years, the fact that she asked me that question, and the fact that I didn't answer her honestly. The years move the way years do when you're young, fast, without warning. One season bleeds into the next, and you don't notice until you look back and realize whole chunks of time have disappeared. Margaret and I kept seeing each other, quietly, casually, the way people do when they haven't named what they are to each other yet. And I think part of me knew what was happening between us. I think I knew for a long time. But knowing something and being willing to do something about it are two very different things. I was afraid. That's the simple truth of it. I was afraid of what it would mean to let someone in that close. My father was not a man who showed much of himself to anyone. My mother learned early on not to ask too many questions. That was the household I came from. That was the model I had for what love looked like. Quiet, unexplained, a little sad. So when Margaret would look at me the way she did, I would feel something tighten in my chest, something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite joy, something in between that I never learned the name for. When I was 22, I met a woman named Helen at a dance in the next town over. Helen was beautiful. She was also loud in a way that Margaret was not. She laughed easily. She filled up every room she walked into. And for a 22-year-old man who had spent his whole life feeling invisible, that kind of attention felt like oxygen. I don't want you to think I didn't care about Helen. I did, in my own way. But I think what I really cared about was the way she made me feel seen. And that's not the same thing as love. I didn't know that then. Margaret met Helen once at a small gathering at my mother's house. I watched them talk to each other for a few minutes. Helen was charming the way she always was. Margaret was quiet. She smiled, but her eyes were different that night. Something had shifted in them that I couldn't quite read. After that night, Margaret pulled back. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would have noticed. She just became a little harder to find, a little less available. The way she used to just appear in the same places I was, that stopped, and I let it stop. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that things change and people move in different directions, and that's just how life works. Helen and I got married the following spring. It was a small ceremony. My mother cried. My father shook my hand afterward and said, "Good, you did right." I remember standing outside the church after, in my good suit, feeling like I had just signed something I didn't fully understand.
Margaret was not at the wedding. I hadn't invited her, not because I was angry with her or anything like that. I just didn't. I told myself it would be awkward. I told myself it made sense not to include her. But the real reason, the one I couldn't admit to myself for decades, was that I didn't want to see her face when I said those words to someone else. Helen and I had a son. We named him Robert. He was a good boy, quiet like me. He had my eyes and Helen's laugh. We built a small house on the edge of town. I kept working at the factory. Helen kept the house. We had a life, a real life, with groceries and Sunday mornings and arguments about small things and all the ordinary business of two people trying to share a space. It was not an unhappy life. I want to be clear about that. It was not an unhappy life. But there was a part of me that was always somewhere else. A part of me that was sitting on the back steps of a house on Elm Street in the summer, listening to a question I never properly answered.
The years passed the way they always do, quietly, without asking permission. Robert grew up fast, faster than I expected. One morning he was small enough to carry, and the next he was taller than me and looking at me like I was supposed to have answers to questions I had never figured out myself. I tried to be a good father, I want to say that. I tried. But I think there are things you can only give to a child if you have them yourself first. And there were things inside me that were still locked away, still untouched, still sitting in the dark where I had put them a long time ago. Helen knew something was missing. I think she knew from the very beginning. But she was not the kind of woman who pressed you on things like that. She loved me in the way she knew how, and I loved her in the way I knew how. And for a long time that was enough, or at least it seemed like enough. I saw Margaret again when I was 34. It had been years since we had spoken. Real years, the kind where you realize one day that someone has become a stranger without either of you deciding it should happen. I was at the hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon. She walked in and we saw each other at the same time. We both stopped. There was a moment, just a small one, where everything went very still. She looked older, not in a bad way, in the way that people look when life has been happening to them. There was something settled in her face, something calm. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, standing in the aisle between the paint cans and the light bulbs. We talked about nothing important, the weather, the town, how things had changed. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about what we had been to each other. At some point, she asked about Robert. I told her he was doing well. She smiled when I said that, a real smile, the kind that reaches all the way. Then she said something I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "I'm glad you became a father, Edmund. I always thought you would be good at it." I thanked her. I told her it was good to see her. She nodded and said the same, and then she turned and walked down another aisle, and I stood there holding a box of nails I didn't need, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. I found out later that Margaret had never married. Not from her, from someone in town who mentioned it casually in conversation, like it was just a fact, like it didn't mean anything. But it meant something to me. It meant something I wasn't ready to look at directly. So I didn't. I put it somewhere in the back of my mind where I kept the other things I didn't want to examine too closely. And I went home, and I had dinner with Helen, and I watched television, and I went to bed. That night I lay awake for a long time. Helen was asleep beside me. The house was quiet, and I kept seeing Margaret's face in that hardware store, the way she smiled when I told her about Robert, the way she looked at me like she already knew everything I was too afraid to say. I wonder sometimes if she always knew. Helen got sick when I was 58.
It came on slow at first, a cough that wouldn't go away, then tiredness that got worse. Then the doctor visits started, and the conversations got quieter, and the house started to feel different in a way I couldn't explain. She lived another 2 years after the diagnosis, 2 years that moved like honey, thick and slow and heavy. I was with her through all of it. I held her hand when it got bad. I sat beside her in the mornings when the light came through the window and she still looked like herself. I tried to tell her things I should have said earlier, things about how grateful I was, how she had been a good partner, how I was sorry I hadn't always been present the way she deserved. She listened, she squeezed my hand, she told me it was okay. But even then, even at the very end, there was a part of me that was somewhere else, and I think she knew that too.